6 years after our divorce, my ex-wife suddenly told me she regretted it. She regretted cheating on me back then, betraying our marriage. She probably saw that I was still single and assumed I was still as deeply in love with her as I was back then, that even after she cheated and divorced me, I'd just be waiting for her to come back. She never would have guessed that I had already remarried, and that my child was already 3 years old. Chloe chose to lay her cards on the table because she'd found out she was pregnant. The ultrasound report showed a gestational sac of over 8 weeks, and since I had just returned from a business trip that lasted more than 3 months, the child obviously wasn't mine. Chloe sat across from me, her attitude cold, and confessed that her affair had started 6 months ago. She wouldn't say who the other man was, only that she was pregnant now, wanted to keep the baby, and wanted to make things official with her lover. Of course, to do that, she would have to divorce me. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard her. How could I have been the guy getting cheated on for half a year without knowing it? But before I could even ask, Chloe seemed to know what I was thinking, looked me straight in the eye, and told me expressionlessly, "You heard me right." I stared blankly at the woman I had loved for 5 years, my heart feeling like it was being pricked by 1,000 needles as a dense pain spread through me, making me feel unsteady on my feet. I had never imagined there would be a problem with my marriage. Chloe was beautiful, but she had a cold personality and was slow to warm up to people. In college, she was the famous, unattainable ice queen, and plenty of guys liked her, but I was the only one who pursued her relentlessly for 2 years before she finally agreed to date me. I really did love her. We had been together for so many years that even though she never said things like, "I love you," I had long since taken it for granted that she had grown accustomed to having me around. Not long after we graduated from college, we got married. We'd dated for 3 years and been married for 2. Only 5 years together, and she had cheated on me? I couldn't accept it, and for a moment I even found myself desperately trying to find some reason, any reason, for her affair. I wanted to say that I couldn't live without her, that I couldn't accept a divorce, but as the words reached my lips, I looked at Chloe's cold, indifferent face and stopped. I asked myself, even if Chloe, who had cheated, agreed to come back and continue our life together, would I really want that? I wouldn't. Of course I wouldn't. Chloe had cheated. She was carrying another man's child in her belly. She was tainted. So tainted. She no longer deserved to be with me. After all our years together, Chloe still didn't really know me. She only knew how much I loved her. And because of that, probably afraid I'd cause a scene, she made a quick phone call right after mentioning the divorce, grabbed her keys, and rushed out, leaving me to process it all alone. She didn't come back until the next morning. I spent the entire night on the balcony in the cold wind, thinking, but I still couldn't understand why Chloe would cheat on me. Chloe's family was well off, and as their only daughter, she started taking over their gradually declining family business right after graduation. Because of that, for the past 2 years, she'd been so busy she barely had time to rest. Working all day and entertaining clients at night had become her normal routine. I couldn't figure out how, being that busy, she could possibly find the time to have an affair. Maybe it was because I was busy with work too, traveling all over the country for business, and didn't spend enough time with her. But that couldn't be an excuse for her to cheat. When Chloe returned, she stood in the entryway, quietly looking at me, or rather, at the carpet of cigarette butts at my feet. Her expression didn't change at all. She seemed completely unable to grasp the devastating impact her affair had on me. I looked at her from across the living room, her polished appearance a stark contrast to my wretched state. I started to wonder why I was punishing myself for her mistake. After what felt like a long time, I heard Chloe ask, "Have you figured it out?" Figured it out? Thinking back on our 5 years together, whenever we argued, no matter who was at fault, I was always the first one to give in. She never backed down. Not once. I let out a cold laugh, crushed the cigarette butt on the floor with my foot, ignoring the pins and needles in my leg, and just lifted my chin to ask her, "Why? Why did you cheat?" We'd known each other for 7 years, been together for 5, and last night I had imagined countless reasons Chloe might give for wanting a divorce. As long as it wasn't cheating, I would have considered forgiving her for any of them, but of course, it was cheating. And cheating was the one thing I could not forgive. Chloe looked away, a hint of impatience in her eyes. "There is no why, Ethan. Our time is up. Can't we just part amicably?" Our time is up, part amicably. What a line. Fine. I managed to force a smile. Let's get a divorce. Maybe I agreed too quickly, which didn't fit with my usual role as her doormat, because Chloe stared at me in surprise for a moment. Her lips parted as if to say something, but in the end, she said nothing. With my consent, the divorce process went smoothly. We didn't even tell our parents. We just rushed to get the divorce papers signed, just as hastily as we'd gotten married. When it came to our joint assets, I fought tooth and nail. There was no way I was letting my share go to Chloe and her lover. Chloe didn't want to concede, but she was the one at fault, and her connections in Chicago were nothing compared to mine. She couldn't win. In the end, she had to give up most of our savings, begging me only to let her keep the house. She bit her lower lip, looking humiliated. "Ethan, you make more money than I do. I'll have a child to raise. I at least need a place to live." I sneered. "What about your lover? Can't he get you a house?" From the look on Chloe's face, I'd hit a nerve. The house was our marital home, and both our families had chipped in to buy it. I looked at the numbers and decided it wasn't worth fighting over, so I finally agreed to let her have it, provided she conceded even more of our savings. Chloe stared at me for a long time, as if she didn't recognize me anymore. Of course, she didn't recognize the version of me that was no longer in love with her. After 2 years of marriage, I didn't have that much stuff to pack. I picked up my bags and left without a single backward glance. Chloe didn't look sad at all, and because of that, I suddenly had the urge to see the man she cheated with, to see what was so great about him that he could make Chloe do something she had always claimed to despise. But I managed to resist the urge. Since we were divorced, leaving each other alone was the best way to respect what we once had. The day after the divorce, I got an iMessage from Chloe's cousin, Heather, asking me who the guy was that went home with Chloe. She even added 3 of those snickering, hand-over-mouth emojis. I stared at the message for a long time and finally felt a sense of release. I replied coolly, "You should ask your cousin that." After sending the reply, I deleted Heather's contact information. Heather had never liked me, and she'd sent that message just to get under my skin. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. The streets were crowded with people coming and going, and standing there among them, I felt like I couldn't find my way home. In that moment, I realized it was probably time for me to leave the city. The next day, I submitted my resignation to my company. I had worked hard in this city for years and had carved out a good position for myself at the company, but suddenly, I just didn't want to be here anymore. I had come to Chicago for Chloe, and now I was leaving because of her. When I thought about it, I had spent almost the entirety of my youth revolving around Chloe. No wonder she got sick of me. After quitting my job, I spent a month visiting a few of the city's landmarks before I was ready to leave for my next destination. 2 hours before my flight, just as I was finishing packing, Chloe suddenly called. It had been over a month since the divorce, and we had made a clean break. There was no reason for us to be in contact, especially not for her to be the one reaching out. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Chloe's flat voice came through the phone. "I heard you're planning to leave Chicago." I replied sarcastically, "You've got good sources." There was a long silence on the other end before Chloe said coldly, "Do whatever you want." Then she hung up. Honestly, if this had been the old days, a tone like that from Chloe would have sent me running to her office with her favorite gift, begging for her forgiveness. But times had changed. Things were different now. Surely Chloe didn't still think I would put up with her moods like I used to. Ridiculous. I stared blankly at my phone for a moment. Then, before heading to the airport, I walked into a nearby phone store and canceled my number. From now on, I wanted no contact with Chloe whatsoever. I was born in a small town in Wisconsin, a place where development is slow and life isn't as fast-paced as in the big cities. The moment my grandmother, who was over 80, saw me, she grabbed my hand tightly, looking me over again and again while scolding me for not eating properly and saying I'd gotten too thin. I slowed my pace, smiling as we walked home together in the warm glow of the setting sun, just like when I was a kid. Looking at my grandma's white hair and her back, so stooped she could barely stand straight, a wave of sadness washed over me. In all those years I spent chasing Chloe, I wondered how many times my dear grandmother had stood at the edge of town, waiting and watching the buses, hoping to see a familiar face get off. My grandmother raised me, so I was never very close to my parents. I hadn't even told them about the divorce or that I'd quit my job and moved back from Chicago. Then, on my 12th day back, our next-door neighbor came over holding her phone for my grandma, and from the complicated way she looked at me, I knew instantly it was my parents on the line. As my grandma handed me the phone, I could already hear my mother shouting furiously on the other end. I hung up without a word. Less than a minute later, it rang again. I barely got a hello out before the shouting started again, even louder this time. I hung up again. After 4 or 5 more rounds of this, my mother finally calmed down enough to stop screaming. She just demanded my new phone number, asking what on earth I was thinking, not telling her about something as huge as a divorce. I pressed my lips together and told her flatly, "I was just thinking that I've been divorced for almost 2 months, and you remembered to call sooner this time than you did the last." She was speechless on the other end. When I was little, my family didn't have much money, so after I was born, my parents decided to move away to find work, leaving me with my grandmother to raise. A few years later, they had made some money, but they also had a new child, my younger brother. Their excuse for having him was that I wasn't close to them. Later, they tried to have me stay with them during the summer to build a bond. My brother was 6 at the time, and I was 11. At that age, I was well past fighting with a little kid over toys, but my brother, whom I'd met only a handful of times, was openly hostile toward me. I picked up his action figures from where he'd thrown them on the couch and put them on the table. When my parents got home from work, some of those same figures were mysteriously missing arms and legs. My brother clutched the broken toys, his lip trembling as he started to cry quietly. He knew my parents doted on him. Sure enough, my parents gave me a complicated look, and I tried to explain that I hadn't done it. I still remember how helpless I felt in that moment. My mother just waved her hand dismissively and said, all right, I know you didn't do it." Then, thinking I was out of earshot, she turned to my father and said, "How did your mother raise him to be like this?" My father said nothing, clearly agreeing that I was the one who had done it. After that, they bought him even more toys, but they kept them locked in a spare room, and only the 3 of them had a key. I have a seafood allergy, something my grandmother always remembered, so we never had it at her house. Before I went to stay with them, my grandma had specifically reminded my mother not to let me eat any seafood, and my mother had nodded and agreed. But on my 3rd day there, I ended up in the hospital after eating a bowl of seafood chowder, and as I struggled to breathe in the emergency room, I could hear my parents arguing loudly just outside the door. My mother said, "How was I supposed to know he was allergic to seafood?" My father's voice was tinged with frustration. "My mom told you when she dropped him off, didn't she? She told me so many things. How could I possibly remember all of them?" My mother's voice grew shrill. "Besides, he's old enough to know what he can and can't eat. I bet he was just being greedy. His brother wanted some, and he didn't want to miss out." Now, their anger wasn't really about me not telling them about the divorce. It was about me quitting my high-paying, stable job. They were afraid that without a job, I'd come after my brother for a piece of the family business. Why else would they have suddenly remembered to call me? The matter must have been serious, because my parents actually drove back that very night. Trailing behind them was my brother, who was in college now. Our eyes met, and he didn't even bother to hide the smug look on his face. I hadn't seen them in over 2 years, and my parents looked much older. The crow's feet at the corners of their eyes were visible even when they weren't smiling, and their laugh lines had deepened, especially my mother's, which made her look somewhat severe. My mother ignored my grandmother's cheerful greeting and shot me a cold glare. Before she even sat down, she snapped, "Ethan, you think you're all grown up now, is that it? Making huge decisions like getting divorced and quitting your job without even talking to us." My grandmother was stunned by the news, looking back and forth between my mother and me, her lips moving as if to speak, but she said nothing. Knowing how thin our family ties were, I felt nothing, just stared at the cigarette burning between my fingers and said nothing. My mother couldn't stand it when I acted this way, and her voice became shrill. "Ethan, is this how you treat your own mother? You have no manners at all. No wonder your marriage failed you." Seeing she was about to go too far, my father grabbed her arm and clicked his tongue in disapproval. "You're letting your anger get the best of you. How can you say that to him?" My mother knew she'd crossed a line but was too proud to apologize to me, so she just snorted and turned away. My father then looked at me expectantly, as if he wanted me to be the one to apologize to her. I was the one who got yelled at, and I was supposed to apologize? On what grounds? Are children born indebted to their parents? My grandmother brought out some tea and said quietly to my parents, "You should talk things over with him calmly." My mother shot her a disdainful look. "What do you know? I think you're the one who spoiled him into being so defiant." She always used my grandmother as a punching bag, and for the sake of keeping the peace, my grandmother always just took it. I dropped my cigarette on the ground, crushed it with my shoe, and turned to my father. "How did you know I was back?" My father gave an awkward smile. "Chloe called me and your mother. She said she hadn't been able to get in touch with you and was a little worried." I pressed my lips together, finding the situation absurdly funny. She was the one who cheated, the one pregnant with another man's child, the one who asked for the divorce, and the one who said we should just part amicably because our time was up. I didn't fight it. Since we were divorced, I was determined to cut all ties with her. So why was she contacting me now? My mother was still rambling on about how wonderful Chloe was, and for every good thing she said about Chloe, she'd make a pointed remark about how difficult my personality was and how lucky I was that Chloe had put up with me. I listened without expression as she belittled me by comparing me to Chloe, dredging up all my past mistakes until she finally concluded that I must be out of my mind. Why else would I not only get divorced, but also quit my job over it? She was right. If I were in my right mind, I wouldn't be sitting here listening to her go on and on. I guess a part of me still held on to some impossible hope. No matter what my mother said, the divorce was final and my job was gone. There was no going back. That night, when I stood in the cold without a single word of comfort, I had an epiphany. I still have a long life ahead of me. So why should I waste it on someone who doesn't love me? In the end, my mother still wasn't satisfied. She insisted that I had to take advantage of this brief period of unemployment and find a new job immediately, to strike while the iron was hot. My father agreed with her, and they both urged me to find another job quickly, pointing out that my college major wasn't relevant to the family business. The way they were so obviously trying to keep me from competing with my brother for the family business was just pathetic. I pressed my throbbing temples and cut them off. Are you done? Both of my parents turned to stare at me, and even my brother, who had been enjoying the show from the sidelines, looked at me in surprise. For years, I had always been good-natured and had never once disobeyed or talked back to my parents, which is why my mother felt she could belittle me without consequence. But today, I suddenly didn't want to take it anymore. I didn't bother beating around the bush. If you're done, you should go, while you can still get a bus ticket back. My mother's eyes widened, and after a moment of stunned silence, she pointed her finger at my face and started screaming again, calling me an ungrateful brat, saying I was cold-hearted. I glanced at her, then stood up and walked out. Cold-heartedness is hereditary, and my cold-hearted nature was inherited from them. No one else was to blame. I found a motel in town to stay in, and just as I got settled, Chloe called. I have no idea how she got my new number. I stared at the number I knew by heart, hesitated, and then let it ring. Chloe wasn't discouraged. She immediately called a second time, then a third. Her patience with me had certainly improved since the divorce. But did she have to be so persistent? On the seventh call, I finally picked up. There was no sound from the other end, just Chloe's steady breathing. I didn't say anything either, just watched the call timer tick up. When it hit 2 minutes, I broke the silence. Our time is up, part amicably. Those were your words. I don't make a habit of staying in touch with my ex-wife. Chloe, whatever it is, don't call me again. There was still silence on her end. I didn't wait for a reply. I just hung up and blocked her number. Chloe was never this attentive to me when we were married. Now that we were divorced, she was suddenly contacting me more than ever. What was it? Was she not used to suddenly losing her personal doormat? It was possible. After all, I had catered to her every need for 5 years. I knew my parents. Having come from poverty, they were terrified of ever going back, which is why we were never close. Since they couldn't be away from the family business for long, I knew they would only stay for 2 or 3 days at most. Since I really didn't want to see them, the only solution was to not go back to the house. I turned off my phone and stayed at the motel for a week. On the evening of the 7th day, my grandmother, leaning on her worn-out old cane, came shuffling into town to find me. The 80-year-old woman had walked all the way from our village. I could just picture her asking people for directions along the way. The setting sun cast an orange glow on her white hair, and she smiled at me with the few teeth she had left. "Ethan," she said, "they're gone. Grandma's here to take you home." I suddenly remembered how, when I was in school, no matter how late I finished studying at night, she would always be waiting at the edge of town for me. I thought I was long past the age of crying, but at that moment, looking at my grandmother's stooped frame, now almost 2 heads shorter than me, I couldn't stop my eyes from welling up. After I went home with my grandmother, I turned my phone back on. Unsurprisingly, there were several novel-length messages from my parents, all of them berating me for my thoughtlessness. I didn't even bother to read them. Chloe had also texted from an unknown number, saying something about wanting me to live a good life, and that she just wanted to make sure I was safe, since we were married once. She said she wouldn't contact me again and that we should both move on. Move on? To be honest, I certainly didn't wish well for the person who betrayed our marriage. I couldn't bring myself to wish her well. The 7-figure balance in my bank account, however, gave me the confidence to do what I wanted. I wanted to see vast landscapes, mountains and lakes, sunrises and sunsets. In our 3rd month of traveling, while visiting a new place, I ran into an older student from my high school days. I vaguely remembered her. She had been a great student, beautiful, with a stunning figure. Back in those days of teenage crushes, she had been the dream girl for half the guys in my dorm. I'd only heard that she was a bit reserved, didn't have many friends, and preferred to keep to herself. We'd barely interacted in high school. I just knew of her. Later, we ended up at the same university and ran into each other a few times, but we were never more than nodding acquaintances. Now here she was, traveling alone with a camera and a simple backpack. Unlike the pale complexion I remembered, her skin was now a healthy, sun-kissed tan, and her figure had blossomed into curves that even her loose-fitting clothes couldn't hide. Unlike Chloe's sharp, almost aggressive beauty, her beauty was warm and approachable, a gentleness that was easy to get lost in. Since we were old acquaintances meeting in a new place, and it turned out we were heading to the same next destination, we decided to travel together. Amelia, as I learned her name was, didn't talk much, but she was respectful, good with people, and knew how to make my grandmother laugh. Grandma adored her. One night, as Grandma and I were sitting in lounge chairs looking up at the stars, she suddenly said, "That Amelia is a nice girl." I knew what she was getting at and gave a dry laugh. Yeah, she is. When it comes to romance, older people are always extra perceptive. But Amelia and we got along well, but there was a gap between us that felt impossible to cross. I admired her, but that didn't mean I was interested in her romantically. Besides, I was divorced. I was hardly good enough for her. My grandmother was getting on in years, so every time we reached a new destination, she needed a couple of days to rest and recover. Because of this, I worried we were slowing Amelia down and kept suggesting she go on ahead of us. Amelia didn't refuse my suggestion, but she just smiled and said, "We can part ways at the next stop. I'd like to stay here a few more days anyway." We were in a historic town in the south, where the misty rain made the scenery look like a painting. Surrounded by such beauty, my mood lifted, and I found myself glancing at Amelia more often. I'd always known she was different from Chloe's flashy type of beauty. Amelia was gracefully charming, with soft features and a scholarly air about her that made her seem very approachable. She noticed me looking and gave me a gentle smile. The reflection of the distant, rolling hills in her dark eyes gave her an air of serene wisdom. The winding paths of the old town were shrouded in a thin white mist stirred up by the light, drizzling rain, making the whole place feel like a dream. I told my grandmother I was going for a walk. She said her old bones weren't up for much walking. She found a spot under an awning with some other old ladies from the town, and they sat there chatting in their thick local accents, laughing together whether they understood each other or not. I stood watching them for a moment, and then I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned to see Amelia walking toward me through the misty rain, holding a beautiful, traditional-style umbrella. She stopped beside me, her movements as gentle and fluid as water. It was a side of her I'd never seen before. Amelia asked if I wanted to go for a walk with her. It was exactly what I wanted to do. I took the umbrella from her, tilting it to cover her. She was nearly a head shorter than me, but she easily kept pace with my stride. We walked together through the historic streets of the old town. Amelia wasn't very talkative, so I started most of the conversations. She listened intently and answered my questions carefully, as if she were trying to find the perfect, correct response for each one. It was actually quite charming. Looking at her delicate profile, I felt a subtle pang of regret. It was a shame. I felt I was long past the age where I could fall in love. Amelia and I went our separate ways at the next town. After that, I crossed 3 more mountains and passed by 2 great lakes, but I never saw her again. My grandmother and I had left home in the early winter. By the time we returned, it was late summer. My grandmother was smiling much more now. She'd go out with her cane to chat with the neighbors, telling anyone who would listen about the vast and beautiful country she had seen. There were several other old folks in the village around her age, and even though her descriptions were simple, you could see the longing and envy in their eyes. But some people couldn't stand to see her so happy and would always make pointed remarks after dinner, asking me about my marriage or my job. The smile would freeze on my grandmother's face, and after a long pause, she would just sigh. "It's the young folks' business. We can't interfere," she'd say, waving her hand. The old woman who brought it up would give a knowing look, and the topic would finally be dropped. After a few days of rest at home, I started to make new plans for my life. My parents' worries were completely unfounded. I had no interest in the family business. I was tired of the cutthroat corporate world and wanted to settle down and live a quieter life. In college, I majored in civil engineering, and while I wasn't the best student in my own program, I snuck into more than a few agriculture classes. In a small country town like this, land is plentiful, so I leased a few acres and decided to try growing flowers to sell. With people making a bigger deal of holidays these days, the demand for flowers was pretty steady. Besides, I wanted to calm my mind and cultivate some peace, and there was probably no better way to do that than by tending to a garden. In the weeks that followed, Heather contacted me a few more times using a friend's iMessage account, trying to feel out whether I was really over her cousin. I had loved Chloe so deeply that my clean break probably just looked like a tactic to them, a way of playing hard to get. I had wasted so much time and energy on Chloe. The cost of leaving was all those years of my youth, which was a steep price to pay. At that time, I was busy building greenhouses on the land I'd leased, so I had no time or desire to deal with her, and eventually, she stopped trying. I wasn't that foolish. At the very least, I knew when to cut my losses. Just as the greenhouses were nearly finished, an old acquaintance showed up at my door. It was Amelia. She was sitting in the yard talking with my grandmother, her slender figure silhouetted against the setting sun, which cast a warm, gentle glow on her pretty face. As if sensing my presence, she turned and gave me a small smile. "I was just passing through the area," she said, "and thought I'd stop by to see you." My heart, which had felt dormant for so long, suddenly skipped a beat before quickly returning to its normal rhythm. Amelia, who had said she was just stopping by, ended up staying and never mentioned leaving. Every morning after that, she would come out with me, following me with her camera, taking pictures as we walked. Sometimes I'd get quite a ways ahead while she was still framing a shot, and I'd stop and wait for her to catch up. I knew she loved the scenery here, loved it enough to pause her travels. When we reached the flower fields, she would show me the photos she had taken, and we'd look at them together. The morning mist, the curling smoke from chimneys, the patchwork of fields, and the few houses nestled among the green hills and clear streams. The scenery of the small town had a charm all its own. When I snapped out of my reverie, I realized we were standing incredibly close to each other. Our eyes met for a second, and we both quickly looked away, flustered. I saw a faint blush creep onto Amelia's cheeks. I finally, belatedly, realized something was happening. So, on the day the first seedlings broke through the soil, I invited Amelia for a drink in the small cabin by the flower fields. As the wine started to take effect, I told her everything about my messy history with Chloe. Amelia paused for a moment. She was smart, so I knew she understood what I was trying to say. After a moment, she let out a soft sigh. Under the dim lamplight, she looked at me intently and said, "You don't have to tell me. I already know." But she wouldn't say how. After the intense love I'd had for Chloe faded, I didn't know if I was even capable of loving someone else. But I knew it couldn't be now. Or maybe I was just overthinking things. Perhaps Amelia didn't feel that way at all. The flowers we planted in late summer sprouted in early autumn, and by the dead of winter, they had formed tiny buds. Amelia's camera documented every stage of their growth. She had transformed from a travel blogger who wanted to see the world into a gardening blogger, and she seemed to be enjoying every minute of it. Habit is a powerful thing, and I had to admit that in just a few short months, I had grown accustomed to having Amelia around. It was like a gentle spring rain, nurturing things silently. Before I knew it, the new year had arrived. On the first day of spring, the roses in the greenhouse bloomed. The vibrant roses were breathtaking, their rich, lingering fragrance filling the air. I picked one and held it in my palm, examining it closely. Amelia, who had been photographing the roses just a moment before, came over and leaned in close to look at the one in my hand. She was so close I could smell the fresh, clean scent of her soap. Next to her stunning beauty, even the vibrant rose seemed to pale in comparison. In that moment, on some impulse, I held the rose out to her. "Amelia, do you like roses? Do you like roses? And do you like the man giving them to you?" Amelia froze, her gaze dropping to the rose in my hand, then lifting back to my face. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes seemed to shimmer with a deep emotion. After a long moment, she took the rose from me, brought it to her nose to gently smell its fragrance, and then she smiled slowly. "I do. Like what? The rose? Or maybe, just maybe me?" I just stared at her, completely forgetting to ask, knowing only that in that moment, the entire sea of flowers around us couldn't compare to the gentle beauty in her eyes. And just like that, I heard the walls I had built around my heart come crashing down. It wasn't that I was incapable of love. After being sure of my feelings, I formally asked Amelia to be with me at the end of March. She didn't seem surprised at all and accepted without any hesitation. Our relationship didn't change much after we made it official. After 6 months together, Amelia was still the same gentle person I had first reconnected with. My grandmother was overjoyed and doted on Amelia even more than she did on me. By April, my flower business had established both online and local sales channels, and I no longer had any issues with unsold inventory. My parents called me after they found out about my flower farm. Perhaps realizing I was no longer a threat to my brother's inheritance, my mother's tone was much calmer, though she still managed to slip in a few digs about my lack of ambition. In their eyes, what kind of future could there be in growing flowers? I don't know why my own parents harbor such ill will toward me, but I've learned not to let it bother me. I told them calmly. Since you're so disappointed in me, just pretend you never had me. My mother's tirade came to a sudden stop. My father quickly took the phone and scolded me, saying I was too old to be so immature. I just laughed. Well, you still have one obedient, sensible son. Having me around was just a burden. My father sighed, told me to calm down, and hung up. I took a deep breath of the fragrant air and turned to see Amelia jogging toward me, holding a bouquet of baby's breath. She handed them to me, rubbing her nose a little shyly as she asked if I liked them. Amelia was so perceptive. Even though I was trying to act calm, she could tell I was upset. I looked down at the flowers and suddenly remembered their meaning: quiet devotion, everlasting love. I remembered how, whenever I argued with my parents in the past, Chloe would just frown at me and even blame me for being stubborn and hot-headed. I leaned in and hugged Amelia, feeling her body tense up for a second before she wrapped her arms tightly around my waist. We were so close I could hear her heart beating faster and faster. I suddenly found myself craving this warmth. 6 years into our relationship, Amelia and I had a 3-year-old daughter who would be starting preschool in September. Amelia was also originally from Chicago, and because of some paperwork for our daughter, we had to make a trip back. It had been 6 years since my divorce from Chloe, and in all that time, I hadn't heard a thing about her, nor had I been back to Chicago. Business was business, so as soon as we got to Chicago, Amelia and I went straight to the county clerk's office. She took our daughter inside to file the paperwork, and while I was waiting, I got a craving for a cigarette, so I told Amelia I was stepping out and found a quiet spot to smoke. After a couple of drags, I glanced around casually, and my eyes froze on a figure at the street corner. I saw a familiar face. It was Chloe. After 6 years, my first instinct upon seeing her was to turn and walk away. But in the next second, she looked up, her eyes scanned past me, and then snapped back. Our eyes met across the street. I took a long drag from my cigarette and looked away, my face a blank mask. Chloe and I were nothing more than familiar strangers now. Our paths would never cross again. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her hesitate for a moment and then start walking purposefully in my direction. I didn't want any involvement with her, so I put out my cigarette and turned to leave. But she called out from behind me, "Ethan!" I frowned but stopped walking. Chloe walked up and stopped in front of me, staring at me for a long time. After a moment, she finally stammered, "When did you get back?" Get back? I had no desire to make small talk. Amelia and my daughter were waiting. I just said flatly, "Can I help you with something? If not, you're in my way." I never expected that question to make Chloe's eyes well up with tears. Chloe had always been so proud. She rarely cried in front of me. But what did that have to do with me now? I clicked my tongue in annoyance and was about to tell her to move when she suddenly said, "Ethan, I regret it." Her random comment made me frown even more. Her eyes grew redder as she said she regretted cheating on me, regretted betraying our marriage. It took me a moment to figure it out. She must have seen me standing there alone and assumed I was still the same guy who was madly in love with her, that I'd just be waiting for her to come back, even after everything. Chloe was too self-assured. In her mind, there was no way I wasn't still her doormat. She never would have guessed that I was already married, with a 3-year-old child. In that moment, I suddenly had a strong desire to see the look on her face when she found out I was married and had a child. I didn't have to wait long. I heard Amelia and my daughter's voices. "Ethan, Daddy." Chloe froze and whipped her head around toward the sound. She saw Amelia, and I think she recognized her, because the color drained from her face instantly. She stared at Amelia and my daughter for a moment, then turned back to me in disbelief, her lower lip trembling, unable to form a single word. My daughter wriggled free from Amelia's hand and ran toward me. I bent down and scooped her into my arms, and she hugged my neck tightly, burying her head in my shoulder while chanting, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." I patted her back gently to soothe her, then looked over at Chloe. In 6 years, she hadn't changed much, still tall, elegant, and strikingly beautiful. The only difference was a newfound maturity. The cold ice queen was gone, replaced by a woman with a kind of intellectual, worldly beauty. It was a beauty that came from within, a product of time and experience. Seeing her again, I felt no need for pleasantries like "long time no see," nor did I feel any of the old resentment. Any love or hate I once had for her had completely faded over the past 6 years. Chloe's eyes were fixed on my daughter, her expression a complex mask, her lowered eyelids hiding whatever storm of emotions was brewing within. I could guess what she was feeling. The backup plan she thought she had was no longer waiting for her. What kind of twisted logic is that? After so many years apart, we had both built new families. I felt nothing for the woman I had once been so intimate with. After a moment of silence, I asked her without a trace of pity, "What's wrong? Is your marriage not working out?" Serves her right. It's what every cheater deserves. Before Chloe could answer, Amelia walked over, her voice as gentle as ever, even as she greeted Chloe. "Chloe, isn't it? It's been a long time." Chloe's hands, hanging at her sides, slowly clenched into fists. She managed to force a smile for Amelia that looked more painful than tears. My daughter, still nestled on my shoulder, called out, "Mommy," and Amelia stroked her head, her face breaking into a loving, doting smile. For some reason, a wave of pure satisfaction washed over me. I took Amelia's hand and said to Chloe, "This is my wife." Chloe's gaze dropped to our intertwined hands, and her eyes darkened as if a drop of ink had fallen into them. Amelia cooed at our daughter for a moment, then looked at me. She gave our joined hands a little squeeze and asked softly, "Ready to go?" I nodded. We had just turned and taken a few steps when we ran into another familiar face, Liam Carter. I remembered him from college. He was a top student and Chloe's biggest academic rival. What stuck in my memory was how they couldn't stand each other because of their constant competition. In college, they never seemed to interact outside of academic competitions, and if they passed each other on campus, they'd both pointedly look away in disgust. When Liam saw me, he was clearly taken aback. He pressed his lips together awkwardly and avoided my eyes, glancing to his right. He was holding the hand of a boy who looked to be about 6 or 7, and when the boy saw Chloe, he pulled his hand free and ran toward her, shouting, "Mommy." Oh, so that's how it was. In that instant, everything clicked into place. I glanced back at Chloe. She bit her lip and looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Amelia's hand tightened in mine. I turned back to her, smiled reassuringly as if nothing had happened, and we continued walking. As we passed Liam, I heard him speak. "Ethan, congratulations." I paused for a second, then let out a cold laugh. "I should be thanking you for making it all possible. The man who broke up my marriage, what right did he have to stand there and pretend to be sincere? Those who leave you behind belong to the past." After we returned from Chicago, our life as a family of 3 went back to its peaceful, fulfilling, and sweet routine. Amelia and I had an unspoken agreement not to bring up Chloe. About 2 weeks later, I was pruning some flowers when I looked up and saw Amelia holding our daughter, staring out the window with a grim expression. Amelia was always so gentle. In all the years I'd known her, I'd never seen that look on her face before. I instinctively followed her gaze and saw a familiar figure standing outside. It was Chloe, standing in the yard talking to my grandmother, though her eyes kept darting toward our window. No wonder Amelia looked so grim. But what on earth was Chloe doing here? After calming our daughter, Amelia glanced at me and said, "You stay here," before pushing the door open and going outside herself. Through the window, I watched her speak with Chloe. The two women were around the same age, but had completely different auras, each beautiful in her own way. My eyes skipped past Chloe and landed on Amelia, and once they did, I couldn't look away. In my mind, Amelia had always been gentle and sweet. This tense, hostile version of her was someone I had never seen before. I watched her for a moment longer, not even realizing a smile was forming on my lips. When Amelia came back inside, I hadn't yet wiped the smile off my face. She was clearly taken aback, her bright eyes darkening slightly as she asked cryptically, "What are you so happy about?" Realizing she had misunderstood, I explained, "It's just, I've never seen you be so hostile to anyone before." Her expression softened at my words. She picked up our daughter from her blocks, leaned against my shoulder with our daughter between us, and said with a sigh, "You should go out there and make things clear with her." She paused, then added quietly, "And don't do anything stupid." I stood facing Chloe under the grape arbor in our yard. In just 2 weeks, she looked much more worn out. She must have come in a hurry, as her clothes were wrinkled in several places. This wasn't the impeccably put-together Chloe I remembered. She just stood there, looking at me without saying a word. The silence was heavy and oppressive. My grandmother, probably unable to stand the tension, got up with her cane, saying the yard felt a bit stuffy, and she was going for a walk. Once my grandmother was out of earshot, I broke the silence. "Chloe," I said, "I know it's been a long time, but there's one thing I've always wanted to ask you." A flicker of hope seemed to light up in her otherwise lifeless eyes. I guess she thought I was going to ask if she ever loved me. How shallow. Chloe cleared her throat, her voice still raspy when she spoke. "Ask." I saw the slender figure in the window curve her lips into a smile, so I took a step closer and asked in a low voice, "Was it worth it?" Chloe froze, the composure on her face shattering like glass. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the shock and confusion in her eyes. A wave of satisfaction washed over me. I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped the vine-covered trellis. "I'm sorry," she said. "An apology 6 years too late." I thought. She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Thought what? That I loved her so much that even after the divorce, I'd still be watching over her from afar? But Chloe, no one is born indebted to anyone else in this world. You're a grown woman now. How do you not understand that? I said nothing, just looked at her coldly. We were supposed to go our separate ways and find our own happiness. Whatever her reasons, logically or emotionally, she had no right to show up here. But here she was, 6 years after our divorce, seeking me out. Chloe met my gaze, her eyes bloodshot, and finally said, "Ethan, you probably won't believe me, but after our divorce, I truly regretted it." I was taken aback for a second, and then I slowly started to smile. So what? I knew better than anyone that Chloe didn't truly regret her actions. She just saw that I was doing fine without her, maybe even happier, and it bothered her. In other words, even if she did genuinely regret it, what difference would it make? What gave her the right to humiliate me like that? And then, years later, show up and tell me she was sorry. Don't talk to me about second chances. I have no respect for people who only want to come back after they've ruined everything. After 6 years, the only reason Chloe could still say something like that to me was because she was still banking on the one-of-a-kind love I used to have for her. I had loved her with everything I had, and she couldn't believe that I could have let her go so easily. And now that she finally realized what she'd lost, it was only natural that she couldn't accept it. Perhaps all these years of farming had mellowed me out, because I felt much more at peace than she did. I had no desire to prolong the conversation and just urged her to leave. She had a new family now. Coming all this way to find me was a betrayal of them. She betrayed me back then. Was she going to betray her new family now? Chloe left my house, but she didn't leave town. She checked into a local motel, and every morning, I'd see her standing in the distance, just watching my house. Amelia's mood grew darker with each passing day, though she tried to hide it from me and our daughter. Then one night, after I had fallen asleep, Amelia quietly got dressed and slipped out of the house. As soon as she was gone, I got up and followed her. Sure enough, she was meeting with Chloe. I crouched under the window of the motel room to listen in. After a moment of silence, I heard Chloe's voice. "Before I came here, Liam told me everything," she said. "My reunion with him had everything to do with you." My heart jumped, but I quickly composed myself. So that was what had really sent Chloe over the edge. Amelia said nothing. Then I heard Chloe say through gritted teeth, "You're very clever." There was another long silence. I quietly stood up and peered into the room through a gap in the curtains. So what? Amelia was standing in the shadows, so I couldn't see her face, but her voice was cold and devoid of emotion. "You were the one who was despicable first, weren't you?" Chloe's body went rigid. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," Amelia said with a cold laugh, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I started falling for Ethan when I was 18. I loved him more at 28, and now at 32, my feelings for him have only grown stronger. But you're different. You have a restless streak in you. If it hadn't been Liam, it would have been some other man down the line. Ethan was miserable with you. He helped me once, a long time ago, so I had to help him. And what if Ethan finds out?" There was a hopeful edge to Chloe's voice now. "If Ethan finds out you manipulated his marriage, are you sure he won't resent you for it?" For a moment, Amelia stepped out of the shadows, her expression unreadable. I heard her say, "I was saving him." How could that be called manipulation? The next day, when I saw Chloe, I walked over to her. Before she could speak, I cut right to the chase. "I heard everything you two said last night." A flicker of hope appeared in Chloe's eyes. She licked her dry lips. "Ethan, there was nothing between Liam and me before that. It was all." I cut her off coldly. "Our marriage was never happy. You never cared about me. Your parents, your cousin, they all thought I was marrying above my station. They never accepted me, and you never once stood up for me. It's been 6 years. We both have new families. For you to come all this way to find me, have you thought about?" I stopped myself and just sneered. "Chloe, we were married once. Let's just leave it at that." The last spark of hope in Chloe's eyes died out. "Our time is up," part amicably. I threw her own words back at her. In the distance, Amelia was holding our daughter, waving to me in the morning light. A smile spread across my face as I walked past Chloe and strode toward them. With our daughter between us, Amelia and I looked at each other and smiled. We each took one of our daughter's hands and walked slowly together, deeper into the flower fields. The sun was still shining, and life was still good. An unhappy marriage isn't an ending. It's the start of a journey to your next happiness. In life, you'll always face hardships and obstacles. You just have to stay true to yourself. Someone will be willing to walk through the fog to find you.